Hello everyone, and welcome to my tutorial where I will walk you through how to paint kiwis using watercolors. To get started, check out my video description below where I have a list of all the materials that I like to use. First things first, we're going to start by sketching out the kiwis. So you can do as many or as few as you want. I'm going to do just a couple, just to give you an idea of how to paint them, and then you can take it from there. So I'll do one circle in the center, and then I'm going to do another one over here. And kiwis aren't perfect circles, so don't worry if you're not the greatest at drawing circles. Just do your best. All right. So once you have a few basic circle shapes, and you can go crazy, you can have half circle shapes coming off the page, have them at the edges, however many you want. If you want to create a wallpaper of it, have fun with it. All right, so actually before I put down my pencil, I'm just going to draw a loose sort of shape, and this is kind of a blobby shape where the white of the kiwi is going to be. And I want to do this because with watercolors we always leave the page showing through when we want white. You can go in with white paint, as I sometimes do in some of my tutorials, but mostly I like to leave the white's white using the page. So you can see I've drawn an approximate outline of where I want my whites to go. So I'm going to use my dagger brush. If you have a fine round brush, that works as well. You just want something with a good point on it to give you control. So first things first, I'm going to start by adding water, clear water, around the kiwi. And you're wanting to add enough water that it's not bubbling on the page, but that you've covered all of the parts that you want to be lime green. Now I have a very bright green on my palette. You basically just want to be able to represent two different shades of green, so whatever two greens you have are fine. So I'm going to start by adding, I call this lime green, but I believe it's called permanent green. We're going to add this around the edge. And we're wanting enough water that it bleeds in on the kiwi. You can see in certain areas where it's not wet, it didn't bleed as much, and I kind of like that look. Then I'm going to take a darker green. This is called cobalt green. There's emerald green. There's a bunch of different shades of green, but any medium tone green you have is fine. And we're just going to drop that in around the center. And like I said, I want my center to be a little bit jagged, so you don't want it to be perfect lines. The outside of the kiwi shouldn't be perfect either. You can drop in a little bit of dark green around the outside too if you want. We're just wanting to have some variation in the greens. And then we're going to move on to the next one. And you kind of repeat the same steps I just showed you there through all your kiwis you have on your page. So I have 3, so I'll go ahead and do that with all 3. So I've added down my clear water layer. Now I'm going to take my bright green and drop it in. And I love the way the water just helps it flow through the kiwi without me actually pushing the color in. Rinse off my brush and grab some darker green. Same as before, just add it on the center. That's quite dark, so I'm actually going to lift a little bit of that out. And the way I lift out color with watercolors is I take a clean, sometimes dry brush, depends how much I want to lift out. And I'm going to take the clean, dry brush and just lift out a bit of that color. And then I'm going to move on to my last kiwi. These are super quick, super fun to do. And a bit of the lime green again, aka permanent green. My watercolors are quite vivid, and I've had a lot of comments on how I get my colors to be so strong, and some of that is just that I keep my palette wet most of the time, so the colors get really saturated from me constantly smushing my brush around in there and getting as much pigment as I can. I use high quality watercolors as well. Sometimes your colors aren't as vivid when you get a student grade set, You have to work at them a little bit more, layer them a little bit more. When I started out with watercolors, I always used the student grade colors, so it is totally doable, but it is a little bit easier to work with a higher quality paint. So I'm just working on the last kiwi here. I'm shrinking the middle a bit. I think I made it a little too dark. I'm just working my way around, letting that dark green bleed out. All right, so now I want to add a little bit of variation to the outsides of them. So what I'm going to do is take some clear water and just kind of pull some clear water around, just because I'm wanting them to be a little bit looser. So wherever I see some white wet paint still, I'm just going to take my brush around and just pull some of that out and re-wet some of that green. And then you can drop in a little bit of the green where you've added that water, just so that it bleeds out a little bit. I'm wanting these kiwis to be a little bit looser. So that's how I sometimes do it when I want to have a bit more control over how crazy I want the watercolors to bleed. And then I'm going to take my flat brush, any brush you have that holds a lot of color will work, and I'm going to do some little splatters around. I'm going to take a little bit of yellow and do a few with yellow as well. And the more kiwis you have on the page, the more fun this is to do. So anywhere where it's wet on the page, the lime's just gonna bleed out. And I'm gonna add a few splatters on the kiwis themselves. Some of them are still wet. And have fun with it. Don't be afraid to try out different amounts. If you have a scrap piece of paper laying around, you can also just play around with that first to get used to how you like to make your splatters. I always do it with one hand, but some people prefer to use two, like sort of this technique. So have fun with it. All right. So now most of these are dry enough that we're actually going to go in and add a little bit of the skin around the kiwi. So for this, I'm going to use raw umber, burnt umber, any sort of dark brown you have. And I'm going to use a very fine brush. And instead of covering the entire perimeter, I'm just going to look for little areas where I can sort of dab in a little bit of brown. And sometimes it's going to bleed in where it's still wet, and that's okay. So I'm just kind of loosely going around, letting the brush skip off the page and adding a little bit of brown. Basically, we're wanting it to look like the skin's been left on and you've sliced the kiwi in half. Anywhere the brown isn't dark enough, I'm just going to go over it a little bit. And like I said, if it's still wet in certain spots and the brown bleeds, as long as it doesn't go too crazy, just let it do its thing. I'm just going to go over it again. Like I said, sometimes with these colors, if you want it to go a little bit darker, you just have to go over it a couple of times. No big deal. All right. So now we want to add the seeds. Now for the seeds, we want them to be completely dry. So if you have a blow dryer, just give it a quick dry. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. And when I come back, I'll show you how to draw the seeds. All right, so now that my painting has had time to dry, there are still some wet spots on it, but we're not going to worry about those because the kiwis themselves are dry. So I'm going to use some black paint and I'm going to draw in some little seeds in the middle. So with the kiwi, if you have one nearby, you can take a look, but basically the seeds just kind of follow the perimeter around the white spot, and then they get a little more sparse as they move out. If you can vary their size using different pressure on the brush, that really helps, but basically this is the general idea. I'm making sure not to have completely even space around these ones, and some of them are facing a little bit different ways. And just follow that same pattern with all of them, being mindful not to touch your painting if there's parts that are wet. So I can feel I just put it on a little bit of wet there, so that's totally okay. But if you have some areas that are very wet, it might mess up your painting, so just be careful. I'm going to change the size up of a couple of them and put some further out. I want these to be fairly close together. Add some more. So you get the idea. We're just basically doing a little perimeter of little black seeds. Obviously, the more kiwis you have, the longer this is going to take, but just take your time, enjoy the process. It can be very relaxing adding them. And the more you do, the better you'll get and the quicker you'll get. I use just the tip of a liner brush and it seems to work perfectly. And these seeds will lighten up a little bit as they dry too. They won't look so stark and black against the kiwi. Watercolor always lightens as it dries. All right, so that's it for that part. And now I just want to add a few more splatters in the background. I think I might add a few teal splatters just for fun. I'm going to add some clear water first. A few blobs of clear water were here and there. And then what I'm going to do is put in some teal because I love the color teal and lime green together. So if you have a turquoise or a teal in your palette, feel free to have fun with this part. Just gonna throw some in here and there. Nothing too crazy. And then I'm gonna take a little bit of brown and add a few brown splatters as well here and there. Not too many of the brown, because we're wanting to keep this nice and bright. And then I'm gonna go ahead and sign it. So if you enjoyed painting along with me, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. It helps the YouTube algorithm and helps my videos show up more. I have a lot of other videos just like this one, other food videos that are very beginner friendly. So be sure to check them out and hit subscribe if you want to be notified as soon as I create other videos. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.